Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video I want to go over some new and some old information about engineering and form some expectations and find potential issues that might arise for solo and multi-crew gameplay. As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's a shout out to our amazing patrons for their support of the channel and the Armory. Also, a note for those of you coming to CitizenCon this year, if you would like to meet me or get an Armory sticker or a patch, I will be at the event and the Bar Citizen event the night before. Also, Comm Relay episodes are now available on Spotify for those of you who want to listen instead of watching a stream replay. Engineering was always planned to be a major feature of Star Citizen. However, we didn't hear much about it until about a year ago. Last year we had a chance to try some of the upcoming engineering features, and very recently we actually got some new information as well. And I believe that we will learn even more at CitizenCon in a few weeks. It also looks like we might see some of the engineering features very soon. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the core features of engineering. And I want to start off by talking about one that was promised a long time ago but didn't get much attention since, and that's of course overclocking. Now, we do already have the option to overclock components on our ships as we fly, which gives us better performance for the price of increased power consumption and heat generation. But originally we were also supposed to be able to overclock components permanently as a kind of a modification. Now, this feature hasn't been talked about in years, but there are two possible explanations. One, it will be completely folded into the new power management, which we will talk about in a minute. Or two, it will be moved into the crafting and modification system. What do I mean by that? Well, we know that as a part of base building, CAG are creating fabricators, and we know that fabricators will allow players to craft better components from blueprints. And I think it's possible that CAG will extend this into being able to modify components with upgrades, which would also be crafted from blueprints. Now, this would be an interesting option because it keeps the skill and knowledge requirements that were implied with overclocking, but it merges it with another system rather than creating a completely new one. And obviously there is the implication that to create overclocked components, players would have to obtain the relevant blueprints. Next, ship and component repair. Right now we're able to repair the hull of our ships using RMC stripped from other ships. As a part of engineering, CAG aimed to introduce the ability to repair damaged components as well. This actually comes in three parts. One, you are able to repair components that are partially damaged using the same method as hull repair, or at least for now. I imagine that eventually they will introduce some kind of a separate repair tool. Two, you can replace fully damaged components with new ones that you either had in storage or you salvaged from another ship. Or you can bring them to a spaceport where they can be repaired. And three, the fuse system. With engineering, not only components are becoming physicalized, but also the power connections between them. This takes the form of fuse boxes around your ship. And as your ship takes damage, these fuses can burn out, which can disable power to certain parts of your ship. So it seems that a big part of damage control in combat will be replacing these fuses. Now, the cool part about this feature and damage control in general is that it drastically changes how ship survivability works in Star Citizen. Engineering also introduces hazards that can damage components like fire and freezing. And while damage control is not an explicit feature, it is a gameplay loop that emerges from engineering. You could technically split engineering into two parts. First part is the preparation for a mission, which would be maintenance and crafting and equipping better components and placing spare fuses where they are needed. And the second part is operations, which would include power management and damage control. So let's talk about damage control a bit more. As you fly around, your ship can take damage, either from combat or other hazards like rock explosions where mining or fires on board. The new engineering features allow you to react to this damage by either repairing it, as we mentioned before, or removing the hazard. For example, by putting out the fire. And this is where survivability changes start emerging. Currently, ships have a health pool that decreases as you take damage, but with physicalized components, CIG want to remove this health pool and replace it with the cumulative status of all components on the ship. Now, for technical reasons, I think there will still be some kind of a health pool to account for structural damage, but that's not important. But the fact is that ship survival will depend on components rather than an arbitrary health pool, and that is actually a major change. And this change, in theory, shifts the advantage in favor of larger ships. Now, why is that? Well, larger ships tend to have component redundancy, meaning that they have more than one component performing the same function, with the notable exception of quantum drives, for now. So if one gets destroyed, there might be another one or more to take over. So technically it might take longer to take out a larger ship, because you have to hit and destroy multiple components. At the same time, a large ship might have crew members actively doing damage control, whether that is putting out fires or repairing components and bringing them back online. Technically, they might even be able to bring a ship that's been disabled back online and make it back to port for repairs. Though this actually brings us to one of the first problems that many backers see with engineering, and that is crew capacity. Most multi-crew ships have just enough crew slots to man all the turrets, so technically that leaves no one to perform damage control. There are two possible solutions here that players can use, but neither works really well. Your first option is to bring extra crew, which actually has some basis in real life, as some Navy ships will have more crew than beds, and crew members will rotate in one bed, a practice known as hot racking. But technically, this crew is counted in the crew capacity of the ship already. Also, in Star Citizen, this might be a problem, because the life support system on your ship might not be able to support more than some number of crew. Which leaves you with the other option, which is to make one or more of the crew leave their turret and do repairs. But in combat, I think that might not be a desirable option. But then again, this plays into the whole risk-reward scheme going on in Star Citizen. At the same time, some ships like the A2 have a dedicated engineer seat, so whoever is in that seat can get out and do damage control while the ship is in combat. And that actually brings us to another feature, which is ship armor. To allow players to damage individual ship components with weapons fire, CIG have to implement the ability for projectiles to penetrate the hull. At the same time, it would make sense for ship manufacturers to protect ships from this by adding armor. For now, it seems that CIG are introducing armor as a component that can be drained by being damaged, and only after that it starts letting shots through to the interior of the ship. And for now, this is actually good enough, and gives CIG another variable to use when balancing ship combat. But what I would like to see in the future is ships having multiple layers and types of armor, which you can swap out as a component. At the same time, I would like to see ships having different amounts of armor around different parts of the ship. So for example, ships having additional armor around key components like the quantum drive or around the cockpit. And now we are finally getting to the big feature that might be coming with 324.2 or maybe 4.0. And that's of course power and resource management. This is a part of the larger resource system being implemented into ships, which actually includes the framework for CIG to add multiple kinds of fuel for our ships. But for now, the main resources you need to manage are power, cooling, and life support. For now, it seems that cooling and life support are pretty simple. If you don't assign enough power to cooling, your ship will overheat. And if you don't assign enough power to life support, the crew will suffocate. It's my understanding that power, cooling, and life support have some amount of reserve, and this reserve will start depleting when production can't keep up with consumption. And that actually brings us back to power management. Right now, the power management on our ships is pretty basic. We can power components on or off, or overclock them, or assign priority with the power triangle. So the basic idea of power management is this. Your power plant produces a certain amount of power, and you can assign this power to various systems and components on your ship. It appears that the base groups will be engines, shields, weapons, coolers, and life support. But we also know that you'll be able to toggle power of individual components as well. From the latest ISC, it also seems that CIG moved away from the concept of your power plant not being able to power all the components on the ship, which was one of the major concerns that backers had during the initial playtest last year. And with this, CIG are also introducing the battery component, which allows you to store excess power to be used later. So I think the idea is that while you're out of combat, you can power down weapons and store the extra power. And then when you get into combat, you can use the stored power to overclock weapons and shields, or replace the power plant temporarily in case the power plant is damaged. The interesting part of power management is that CIG will allow us to save power profiles and apply them quickly. So rather than having to fumble around with the sliders all the time, you can just set up a few profiles and apply them depending on the situation. In the latest engineering ISC, CIG also mentioned that these engineering profiles are bound to your character, not to the given ship. So you should be able to create a profile on one ship and then apply it on someone else's ship. That is, assuming it's the same kind of ship and has the same components. Otherwise, you will need to make adjustments. So technically, you could have someone who is very good at making these profiles become the chief engineer of the group, and maintain and set up profiles for people's ships, maybe even in exchange for credits. But besides power and resource management, the newly added engineering console has a few more interesting features. For example, it allows you to see the status of rooms, components, and doors, which allows you to quickly figure out where the damage is or if there is a fire. You can also control individual doors and the atmosphere inside rooms, which is very cool. But what I'm curious about is how these features of the engineering console are going to work on ships that don't have a dedicated console so far. And there are actually a few options. The one I think CIG are going with is adding engineering consoles to all ships where it's possible, so ships that have an interior, which would actually make sense as many of these ships already have placeholder engineering stations. And for fighters and other small ships, the full engineering console actually doesn't make much sense. So I think all they're going to get is the expanded power management screen we saw in the ISC episode, and that would of course be added to all ships. But the one thing I would like to see is having a portable engineering console as a part of your Mobiglass. We already have the ship status screen, so I would like to see this expanded into a full app that would at least let me open doors remotely or check the damage and status of my ship. But I think that CIG will eventually build something like this. And with that being said, that's all for today. What do you think? How do you think engineering is going to impact how we play? What engineering features would you like to see? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.